we need to talk about America's $35 trillion debt bomb. Now, I know that number sounds so huge it's almost meaningless, but its fuse is connected to the entire global economy. And if this thing goes off, believe me, the fallout could land right at your doorstep. Let's get into it. First, I just want you to look at this number, $260,000. Just let that sink in for a second. Now, what if I told you this number, in a way, has your name on it? Because that's the slice of the national debt for every single household in America. I mean, just look at the comparison. Back in 1980, it was just a tiny fraction of that. This isn't some abstract government number. It's a burden that has exploded in just one generation. It's a deeply personal problem now. And here's the grand total, $35 trillion. To give you a sense of just how fast this is moving, about a third of that debt, a staggering $10 trillion, has piled up just since 2020. That incredible speed is really at the heart of the challenge we're unpacking today. Okay, so let's really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this $35 trillion problem. This isn't just some economic headline. It's a very real burden that's being passed down to future generations. So get this. Just look at the cost of servicing the debt, just paying the interest. As you can see right here on this chart, the U.S. is now spending over $1 trillion a year on interest payments alone. That is more than the entire defense budget. It's even bigger than the entire economy of a country like Switzerland. The country is literally borrowing new money just to pay the interest on its old debt. So you have to be asking, how in the world did things get this extreme? Well, a simple way to think about it is to picture the entire U.S. economy as one giant, maxed-out credit card. Yeah, this credit card analogy really nails it. For decades, the government has spent way more than it brings in through taxes, so it borrows to cover the difference. But just like with your credit card, that debt comes with interest. The problem is, America's been swiping that card for a long, long time, and now it is completely maxed out. And this number right here, 120%, this really puts it into perspective. This is the U.S. debt to GDP ratio. It means the country's total debt is now bigger than its gross domestic product, the value of everything it produces in an entire year. To put that in context, that is the highest this ratio has ever been in American history. It's even higher than it was at the end of World War II. And this timeline, wow, it really tells the story, doesn't it? It took 205 years from the founding of the country all the way to 1981 to hit the first $1 trillion in debt. But then, as you can see, after the 80s, things just started to take off. And from the 2000s on, it's just become a complete runaway train. So, this runaway train leads us to a pretty scary question. What happens if the U.S. just can't pay its bills? A default wouldn't just be some problem for Washington. It would have immediate, severe consequences for the entire world. Okay, to understand what a default means, you have to understand this. The U.S. government bond. Think of it as a super safe IOU. Other countries, huge banks, even individuals buy these bonds because for decades, they've been considered the safest investment on planet Earth. The entire global financial system is basically built on this foundation of trust. But here's where it gets tricky. A default doesn't have to mean the U.S. just stops paying. As the economist Paul Krugman points out here, the U.S. can always print more money to pay its bills. The catch? Printing trillions of new dollars massively devalues the currency, which is really just another form of default. It's a default in disguise. So here's how a crisis could play out step by step. It starts with the U.S. visibly struggling to make those massive interest payments. That creates doubt, and then global investors start to lose confidence and begin selling off their U.S. bonds. That can quickly turn into a mass sell-off, where suddenly nobody wants to buy U.S. debt. And finally, to try and attract any buyers, the U.S. would be forced to offer insane, skyrocketing interest rates, which of course just makes the debt even worse. It's a terrifying, vicious cycle. This whole situation sets up a pretty dramatic fork in the road for America's future. It really could lead to two completely different outcomes: a story of boom or a story of bust. On the one hand, you've got the positive scenario, right? The world still sees America as a place for innovation, and U.S. assets are still a safe place to park money. A weaker dollar could actually make U.S. exports cheaper and more competitive, sparking an economic boom, kind of like what happened after World War II. But on the other hand, you've got the negative scenario, a total crisis of confidence. Markets panic, Borrowing costs go through the roof for everyone, businesses and regular people. And the government trying to print its way out of the problem just triggers runaway inflation.
But here's the thing, this future isn't set in stone. The US isn't just a passenger on this runaway train. It can still pull the lever and choose a different track. So let's look at the 4 main paths that could lead out of this debt crisis.
So there are basically 4 ways to go, and as you can see, each one comes with a pretty big catch. You could hope for a massive economic boom, but you can't just wish that into existence. You could print more money, but that risks making your currency worthless. You could hike taxes, but good luck with that. It's always deeply unpopular. And the last option is to cut spending. And that brings us to this final number, $250 billion. And get this, that's the low-end estimate of what the US government wastes every single year. From simple stuff like payment errors, the high-end estimates are closer to $1 trillion. Eliminating that waste, well, it would be like finding hundreds of billions of dollars in spare change behind the sofa every single year. Ultimately, any of these solutions will require a ton of political will to finally stop kicking the can down the road. The choices are hard, the stakes are global, and that debt clock is definitely ticking. So the final question is, will America choose a path before time runs out?